SNP, we are a specialist in SAP-centric data migrations and beyond. One tagline to describe it is basically, keep the best, transform the rest. In a dream of mine that hasn't come true yet, you're sitting there in a workshop with a customer. They tell you requirements verbally. You note them down. You take the transcript of basically what you have, and it automatically reflects in the software. With, I think, agentic behavior and function calling, or MCP specifically, this is actually quite possible, and it can bring the learning curve down quite a lot. Know where you are, know where you want to go, have a vision. But don't aim at building this vision out sequentially. It's okay to automate step 1, have step 2 be manual, step 3 maybe also, and automate step 4 and step 5. So naturally progress where you have the most opportunity at the given point in time. Then revisit continuously and find the next good option to drive value forward.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. Today, I have with me Dominik Wittenbeck, and Dominik is the Group CTO of SNP Group. So it's a really interesting story because SNP Group, was founded a long time back, 30 years, I believe, like 1994, and is really working on helping companies improve their SAP data migrations. Was founded as a consulting company and then developed a product that's used by many large system integrators today. So for our a new automation mindset, I think that's really, really interesting because so what we can do is deep dive into an automation journey. In this case, took 30 years. And so 30 years in which SNP Group refined and refined again the automation of SAP data migrations step by step. So I think there's a lot to learn for all of us for our own automation journeys. Dominik, welcome. And let's start with what SNP Group offers today. So how exactly do you help customers with their SAP data migrations, and what exactly is it that you help automate?
Well, thank you very much, Markus, for having me here in the session. So SNP, we are a specialist in SAP-centric data migrations and beyond. If there's like one saying or one tagline to describe it, is basically keep the best, transform the rest. Because what we do in essence is basically whenever a customer has a need for an M&A, restructuring, standardization, modernization of their SAP environment, and that's typically just a single system, that's typically multitudes of systems basically connected with many, many others, we can make it look like it has always been this way. We can make data changes historically consistent, which gives customers the chance to do restructuring even into the past, basically. Of course, there are legal boundaries to that, right? Which we have to obey. But basically, we can make basically any change, which is what customers love. So the key benefits that we bring to customers is time to value. When you look at SAP, those systems have a tendency to become very large, very customized, very specified for the purpose of the specific business and industry that the customer is in. So many of our customers are really on the enterprise level, and they have systems that they customized and tweaked for 15 years. So they invested a lot of time and a lot of money into specializing the core processes. And while that's the case, which distinguishes them from their competition, they want to keep that, but still gain the benefits of a new standardized cloud-based world, basically. So there is some leap to be taken. And what we do is basically that multiple requirements that come along with this. So typically you have to do prep work on the systems, then you do the actual data migration. And then only afterwards, you're trying to basically see the benefits. We're reducing this timeline into a single project. So one of the key things that we do, table-based migration, gives us the chance to do multiple requirements at once, basically, giving the customer high flexibility for all types of demands, be it data cleansing, selective data migration. Let's get rid of those old company codes that we have divested and the data is still in the system. It's cluttering the configuration. All that goes away. Hey, when we go in cloud, we have to be cost sensitive, right? Because TCO is probably opposed to the data center that we're now running our service on is probably skyrocketing. So let's select on data. Let's consolidate systems, put multiple into once. And then they also say like, yeah, but doing everything at once might be quite risky. Let's stretch this out so our organization can actually digest the change as we go. Let's rather go with one business unit first and see whether the requirements that we put on the table actually do match the business need, and then move on with other entities later and thereby minimize the risk. And while you're at it, let's do some improvements along the way. Let's standardize. Let's go back to standard processes where they are not our differentiator, basically in the market. And all of that, of course, with minimal disruption, which many times means minimal downtime and the least business involvement possible, although minimal business involvement isn't really possible. These are really like the core benefits that we bring to our customers, that we can make the system landscape look like it has always been this way. So people can be redesigning and basically dreaming their ideal processes in the future without losing their core differentiators, basically.
That's really cool. So look, for the sake of the audience, right? So they're on their automation journey. So I thought it was a really cool example, what you've done. I mean, sounds like, you can sense how like 30 years of refinement
you
went
even
into
see
that.
30 years of refinement, actually.
Well, take us back to the beginning, maybe to start with, right? So I'm really curious, like, how did this start with? And then maybe you can also help us, give the audience a couple of milestones on how this refinement progressed.
I've been with the company basically all of my professional career. You can basically say I've been seeing nothing else but customers and partners, of course, but I've never been with another company. So maybe I'm blind spotted one way or the other. I hope this doesn't hurt. So the history from SNP, and I'm not there from the very beginning, so I wasn't one of the founding fathers of SNP, but I was joining the company as a young lad when I was like just 20, exited military service basically, and went into a dual study. And that was like, I don't know, 25 years ago. So 2000, basically 2000, that's when I started. At that point in time, we were basically a consulting company, right, for SAP consulting. Even the transformation thing didn't really have big of a presence back in the days. It was starting, but it wasn't like really the big thing. I think with all these currency conversion pieces that happened in Europe around 2000, 2001, 2002, the necessity for tooling and for conversion services, first of all, basically came into existence. And at that point, of course, the way how consultants or consulting or services works is basically you bill for time, right? So there's not like an intrinsic motivation for automation. But it came pretty quickly as projects grow bigger and we realized that, hey, there's much more demand out there in the market for these types of services that we can possibly basically deliver with doing everything manually. So I think it was something around like 2006 when we acquired a company called Tebis in Thale, that's like in the center of Germany, basically, which had a tool for SAP to SAP migrations, basically for upgrades from R2 to R3. And that then we picked up and developed in the first, I'd say software piece, which we called Transformation Backbone back then. And at that point in time, I would describe it more as a suite of different tools stuck together, holistic UI type of thing, but you needed very much a deep expertise still. So many of the people that we had on board operating on top of this software, basically, I guess, had 5 to 10-ish years experience or so. And of course, this does not scale. So we wanted to go above and beyond. And this is really where the automation journey started for us. Where we said, like, okay, we are doing projects, migration projects. Projects have a tendency of having a lot size of one, right? One is different from the other if you think about it end to end. It's not so different if you think about different pieces of it, right? It's always different combinations. Some of them have twists and tweaks, but over time, And that's the piece of learning that we basically gathered was there is patterns that you have to identify basically in the processes. And no matter how scattered the processes seem to be at the beginning, gathering these patterns is the first step for your automation journey, because that allows you to distinguish the things that you can standardize just from a process perspective versus the things yet you can't yet standardize, because typically you don't know enough about them. You hadn't had enough instances of those to basically be certain that stuff runs in a particular way, and so on and so forth. So what we built back in the day was basically I would call it a workflow engine, many times represented as a project plan, because in projects, naturally, that's an artifact that everybody sees and immediately understands, right? It's lines, they're hierarchically nested, they have times, and so on and so forth. And as soon as one line representing one task you can automate within this picture, you did your first step for automation. And we started with things, something like at the beginning, analysis. And then later on, once all the migration rules have been defined and set up, let the migration engine run, basically. And then the validation afterwards became standardized and later on automated. So basically, the overall plan that we had, the methodology that we developed over the years, becomes automated over and over and over and over. And at about, I would say, 2019, we basically rebranded was Transformation Backbone back then, because we had the idea and the dream that we would like to scale above and beyond SNP as a service company with tools. We wanted to become a software company. So what we try to do, and by now time has proven that we were quite successful with that, we tried to scale out by incorporating SIs, big system integrators like IBM, Accenture, and the likes, to work on our software for this particular use case of SAP-centric migrations, which, well, without a doubt, demand is raising and raising. And I mean, SAP has been doing us a great favor, to be honest, when in something like 2015 or so, they came up with S4HANA. And now basically for the last 10 years, everybody is on an S4HANA migration. And alongside with that, of course, they want to basically also get the business benefits out of that. So with that, the platform needed to progress even further, right? Because now we didn't have all of the stakeholders and users directly in the company anymore. They were outside. And not only did we need to change our processes, but also the way of how the platform basically worked. So we were looking in how can we actually get the learning curve lower, right? How can we simplify specific things? How can we automate tasks which are tedious and error prone, basically by wrapping them into a well-defined spec and making them part of the overall automation process? As an interesting thought, or interestingly, the metaphor of the project plan being the driving factor for the whole thing never really changed, but it refined over time and refined basically. Until I think in like 2020 or so, we acquired a company called DataWatt. It was a former competitor of ours. Now we're basically best friends, right? And they had a couple of tools alongside with the actual data migration. So now we would be able to take care also of system decommissioning, which typically happens after the project's being done, because now you have your source system lingering around. What to do with that? You need it probably for retention purposes, because you have legal obligations to look into the data once in a while, or for auditing purposes, and so on and so forth. And so you want to keep this around, but you want to make this cheap and elegant. So there's a solution for that now. And also, you just migrated into a new world with this new spec. Well, probably everything goes down the drain, because after you did such a project, you start to basically go back into old patterns, and stuff starts to degrade basically again. Where we are trying to deploy mechanisms such as continuous archiving, for instance, that helps at least keep the system clean along the way. And that's not the last iteration of where we're basically going. Nowadays, we're thinking even beyond that scope, because right now, with the business landscape and with the environment and the economics just changing very, very drastically, we recognize that many customers actually do need to make decisions long before somebody like us for the data migration would come into the game. So by now, we're trying to utilize basically the tools and the whole platform to do analysis pre the fact that there's something being done to find out how agile the business of the customer actually is. How ready would they be to jump and get rid of a system, get rid of an entity in case they need to divest it, for instance? What is the impact of that? And how can you basically stay in shape in order for you that the next global crisis doesn't hit you so bad? So that is something that nowadays CEOs, CIOs, CFOs are looking into, and we are building basically and progressing towards a platform that can exactly do this. So it's a continuous journey, really, Markus, that we've been started from, we were consultants, then consultants with tools, software-enabled services, and now with all the partner business coming in and the self-sufficiency of this analysis with the customer, it goes even above and beyond.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'm looking for the different tips and tricks along the way, and I think you mentioned quite a few. Multiple times on the journey, it seems to me like you really made brave moves, I would say, where you said like, okay, well, instead of being a consultant, I want to become a software company, which is, I think it's a brave move because you now bringing in other SIs. You're almost like disrupting yourself.
It is not easy, right? I mean, if you have a consulting force, of course, I mean, they are incentivized by something completely different. Keeping those guys in the game motivated to contribute to the platform is a task of its own. And it took us many, many tries to really get that, right? And basically get the whole company behind this move. But luckily, the economics, meaning the demand, are basically growing so quickly and so high that people are just overloaded. They are looking for automation just for themselves, basically, to get their work done sufficiently and quickly in a good quality. So customer doesn't come back complaining with what has been migrated wrongly or something like that, for instance, right? So this is typically, and maybe one of the advices, or maybe lucky shots, I don't know whether this is really an advice, but one of the lucky things that we were in is that there was always increasing demand and decreasing experts basically on the market. So automation is a must in that sense. You can't get around it.
I like also towards, the very end of the journey when you almost like reformulated what you can do from doing that migration project. I don't know, it's almost like kind of after something happened to making it more preventative in a way of like doing diagnostics and kind of attacking the problem before it actually starts. I think that's a pretty smart move. I'm very curious. Now it's 2025. Everyone talks about AI, GenAI, and so on. Any thoughts? How that can modify and evolve the SNP story, automation story again?
Absolutely.
Do you see any? Are you working on certain stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the core problems I think where AI can really help in automating specifically in this case is the lot size of one problem that inherently comes with projects, right? They are always different. Again, as I said earlier, they have patterns, but they're always differently combined. It's not like you can build a perfect automation and it will run on the next customer because that next customer has vastly different requirements. Now, AI is basically a good way to build glue between those different patterns because what AI does, at least this is how I experience and I use it basically, it helps with a lot of research tasks that many of the consultants are basically doing. You're looking into data structures, see how to connect them, how they interrelate, and so on and so forth, right? To build a mapping into the new processes. You're looking for corresponding values on the left and on the right-hand side and using secondary attributes. Stuff like this. You're looking for correlations in data. If I use this, was this other piece, this other process also used? And you do this for, I don't know, how many quadruple million of times basically on instances of processes. How great would it be if there would be an agent that can support me given a good prompting and agentic behavior with exactly those tasks? Of course, I always want to be in the driver's seat, right? I always want to be making the final decision as a consultant, right? Or as a customer in the end. But everything that helps to speed up specifically research-based tasks like investigations of systems or interpretation even of results is a great gain. It also helps quite a lot when you think about the expertise level. We have many guys in our companies that are there 25 years plus, and we're continuously ramping up new people in the magnitudes of new people, basically, let alone all the partners that we are onboarding. Now, these guys are new and fresh. Wouldn't it be great if they can participate from the knowledge that all those senior and seasoned consultants basically have, even if they don't really know how to ask the question, because the whole that context is automatically fed into what they do when they operate the system. So what we did, actually was already last year on a big fair of ours, we have Transformation World, which is basically our house fair, which we're having each year. We basically released the first candidates of, back in the days, we called them co-pilots, basically, which, well, classically with a chat-based approach, you were able to control the software and the behavior in the sense of you were, instead of dragging and building modules and objects and tables and rules, you with natural language, you can just like specify. So in a dream of mine that hasn't come true yet, it would be you're sitting there in a workshop with a customer. They give you some documents, or maybe they don't even do that. They tell you requirements verbally. You note them down. You take the transcript of basically what you have, and it automatically reflects in the software. With, I think, agentic behavior and function calling, or MCP specifically, this is actually quite possible, and it can bring the learning curve down quite a lot. But of course, on the contrary, you always want to see, because you want to be in the driver's seat. With such a delicate thing as data migration, where I stated we can be historically consistent or change history, basically, you want to be very precise in the end. There needs to be a human-made call, right? So what you still need is a UI that shows you how the stuff basically goes. But when I was doing the presentation last year, and I was building up for the demo, basically, I was amazed myself when I was like going like, okay, build me up, I don't know, objects for the most common SAP modules, and then tack, all over in the UI, those things were popping up that would otherwise have taken me, I don't know, at least half an hour to build. Then, hey, add some common tables. Hey, I want to like split is everything by company code or select everything by company code. Well, take only the first 2 fiscal years and let's leave all the other data behind. And all those rules were basically automatically building up. At the first increment of that, I think with the first demos, I think I was using like GPT-4 back then. I was spending like $20 or so for each of those sessions because of the enormous context I basically had to feed in. But as the price of all of this, all of the prompting basically completely goes down drain, basically, this becomes a commodity in the meantime. So this is absolutely feasible to be doing, to basically tackle those aspects of you don't have enough people really, and you have to make these people on board really fast.
Is there anything, I'm just curious, because, you know, it seems like GenAI is going to change all of our lives. But in what you guys do, are there certain areas, maybe to ask the reverse, are there certain areas maybe where the GenAI isn't the perfect solution? Things that, you know, should remain deterministic, or maybe, I mean, you talked about the precision of what you have to do there. I mean, if there's a little error, this can mess everything up. Are there areas where you say like, yeah, there I don't want GenAI?
Well, I would give full control of GenAI to validating the data migration. So we've built the tool for doing the data migration. We also built tooling for data validation. And while I think GenAI is a great companion to build up the rules for the validation, basically, again, right? The actual sign-off that happens if all the rules really are complied is something that, yeah, can be GenAI assisted, maybe pointing you to specific things, but has to be humanly signed off in the end, which, well, leaves the consultant, and this is typically not us, right, signing this off, but basically the customer or the SI on the other side to do the final check here. So I wouldn't give AI right now, and maybe never, I'm not really decided here, the ultimate control over everything, which is somehow legally relevant. I would always have it make suggestions in the legal boundaries of how you can share data and so on and so forth, of course. But the final call, a full automation via AI, I think that is, at least from a legal perspective, for me, not thinkable at this point for these certain tasks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that makes sense. Look, similarly with the with your automation journey. I mean, you told the story. I mean, it sounds incredible. I mean, it sounds like a really a great progression, and you're moving ahead, always new stuff, and so on. I want to look on the other side, because we can learn from mistakes also. Maybe there was something where you feel like, oh, we shouldn't have done that. You overcame it, but maybe as an advice for some people, well, if you ever think about doing this on the automation side, maybe our experience wasn't that great, or maybe you made some wrong assumptions about something. Maybe there were some surprises that you really didn't see coming. I guess I'm asking about the war stories on that 30-year journey that kind of makes it interesting.
There are so plenty. I think the most tricky part, also for me personally, is misconcepting and jumping to conclusions too early. You think you know it, and it maybe comes with the typical ivory tower association that comes with R&D, and I'm prone to this. I really am. But you have to overcome this, and you have to overcome this constantly, because you can't jump to conclusions for things that you don't exactly know. For me personally, I learn with my hands. What I mean with this is I learn when I'm doing something, right? Then I really understand. I can read, I can listen, I can see, but really understanding things is when you are doing stuff, which means that you will become the best engineer in automation if you are a subject matter expert. Now, that's not what typically R&D is doing, right? R&D is there. They try to understand with requirements engineering and the help of product management, how does stuff work? Then they build something, then they give it back to the SMEs, and then they test that. Not so great, to be honest. What's better is if you are aiming at democratizing the access to the automation itself. So the parts in our software where this works the best is where our consultants have great liberties of doing stuff. They come up with all sorts of solutions, unimaginary to somebody like me, who's seeing something many times only from 10,000 feet apart, basically. Very practical solutions, which if I had thought about them, I would have made them super complicated. So my advice here would be, don't jump to conclusions too early. Make your stakeholders your engineers, if possible. And we were in a great situation that we actually could do so, because, I mean, coming from a service company, you basically have subject matter experts all over the freaking place, right? You don't have so many R&D people, and don't try to basically stuff R&D on top of your services. Try to work with them, give them the tools, and watch what they do with them, and give them better tools and easier to work with tools over time. And you will scale out much more easily. You will find creativity that you never will be able to think of. Something that your stakeholders wouldn't even be able to describe as a requirement. Because if I put myself into the shoes as I'm learning, as I'm doing by hand, I don't have a perfect plan for something when I start something. I learn along the way. I continuously refine along the way. So it would be, I think, foolish to think, at least after 30 years of doing it, that you can anticipate every little bit that you need to anticipate right up from the front. You're going to fail. So better you fail fast. When you fail with many instances, you learn a lot, and you basically build on top of those mistakes, because those you can avoid repeating in the future. Mistakes that you didn't make, you can't avoid, really. You can build for them because you anticipate them, but I guarantee you they'll hit you differently than you initially expected.
So I think what you're really saying, like, democratizing the tool and kind of getting it out there and making it open so that people who are subject matter expert, who are actually doing it, can make little changes themselves and can innovate themselves. I think that's
really key.
It very much resembles also like what we think of our product here, Workato. No, I think that I like that a lot. Again, thinking about this journey, your journey, like over 20 years, what would you say, any things that was the biggest surprise for you
Yeah,
along the way on that automation journey?
that people change their minds, or that people don't remember everything, or that there isn't the standardized process that you thought there's going to be. You ask one person, you get 1.5 answers. You ask another person, you get another 1.5. You already have 3. You ask them together, you get 5, because they are basically getting into discussion. So when I was initially starting with all of this, I was under the exception that, hey, those guys, they are basically the gods. They know everything because they're doing this for so long. But turns out that due to the lot size of one problem, they also don't know everything. And they need to have the ability and the freedom to make wrong choices and revert later on. So yeah, that turned out to be a surprise, because I was of course, like when I was studying, I was basically told that, hey, there's a specification, then you build it, and then you roll it out, and then you test it. Well, rather test it and then roll it out, and then everything is going to be good. That's dead wrong. You have to always take tiny baby steps. And while agile methodology isn't really new, actually, it's something that at least I had as a learning along the way, that it really, really goes a long way. Because if you can't anticipate everything, you want to make as tiny steps as possible, as fast as possible. So when anything breaks, you know you only need to take one step back and take a different direction. You also know then that if you are continuing this way, you will always get the shortest route to the point where you actually want to be. Does this mean that you know exactly up front where you're going to end up in the end? No, not necessarily. But you know that each step is a progress, right? And nothing is holding you back from making more progress by making more steps.
I think you just described very articulately, that incremental process also, where, sometimes almost like making one incremental step gives you no new insights that might actually change, what the direction is, or what the actual end result is, which totally makes sense. Because how can you know? And people don't. I mean, it's been my experience also that people don't really know the process exactly up front, or even the what the end result is. And the joke with the ask 3 people, get 5 answers. I've seen that myself doing stuff. So sometimes people always talk about, automation takes a long time, and automation, is hard to do, and so on. What would be your advice, kind of how people can maybe accelerate it, or how people, or what gets people in a better position to automate? Maybe like what takes friction out of this process based on your learnings?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, know where you are, know where you want to go, have a vision. But don't aim at building this vision out sequentially. You will basically build out steps and progress. And I know this might sound counterintuitive to the stepwise approach I just advised for when actually building the stuff. But from a planning perspective, you should have a vision where you want to go. This is like the end-to-end story that you want to basically automate, or that you want to be able to tell. But you don't have to automate step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3. It's okay to automate step 1, have step 2 be manual, step 3 maybe also, and automate step 4 and step 5. So naturally progress where you have, I'd say, the most opportunity at the given point in time. Then revisit continuously and find the next good option to drive value forward. So automation, I would say, don't go for full automation end to end from the beginning. Take automation as a journey and build it wherever there is currently opportunity to really build it with meaningful value behind it, because otherwise it becomes tedious and it's very easy to take wrong turns, wrong assumptions, invest a lot of time into them, and you will eventually discover that, well, now you're in the future, requirements have been changing, you're tossing away half of what you've been doing. So what is always good to accelerate stuff is if you have a platform or at least a methodology in your company to release often and make changes easy to do. And in order to make changes easy to do, of course, you need a supportive platform for doing that, or again, at least a supporting methodology for doing that. But you also need a supporting culture to do that, right? If your whole thinking is basically towards a when is this going to be delivered? When is this going to be done? Basically, type of thinking. Of course, this helps to set expectations. But if you do this for like a too long period of time, you take away the chance of finding new opportunity. And that's something that I think from a culture perspective, you need to build a culture in your company where failing and learning is an integrated part of the process. It's not a flaw. It's actually something that you should embrace, because the earlier you fail, the faster you can actually improve. The best improvements come from failures that you've made because they stick in your mind like crazy. Everything else is just like, yeah, that could happen. Let's build because somebody else said so. But something that you experienced yourself, you're never going to forget.
This is fascinating because, and you know, quite a bit of research when we wrote our book, The New Automation Mindset. You know, when you go to the dictionary, you look up automation, it basically defines automation as something that's almost the opposite of innovation. It basically thinks of like a factory robot. It basically says, well, automation is you take what is already there and you just basically replace manual human tasks with a robot. Now, we thought about this quite a bit, and we somewhat disagreed. And that's why we called it the new automation mindset, put the word new in there, because we're like, well, wait a second. I don't think in the business processes, in data-driven processes, in software, that's not how it is. Maybe in a factory it is, but and even there, I don't think it is.
I mean, you have dependencies, right? You have suppliers, you have demand, you have things that change outside of your control. You need to be able to react to them. You need to be able to stay agile. And this also means that whatever you build needs to have some plasticity, right? You need to be able to change it rather quick than slow without breaking everything apart. So also loose coupling and commoditization and modularization are properties that you should definitely deploy when building such a process. So when something fails or needs to be changed, let's talk about failing, but needs change, basically, it's very easy and doesn't break the whole thing apart, which is easy if you build automation end-to-end with the same team that has the only knowledge how to, let's say, operate the automation platform in the end. If that's a distributed mechanism and everybody who's expert in specific pieces of the automation can author or at least contribute to how the automation is basically being done or how the process step is being done, then you get a far more resilient process in the end to begin with, and much easier change if something needs change.
So really, to you, the process of automation is kind of an innovation process. You're innovating. I mean, that's the way you described it. You say like, well, don't try the whole thing. Innovate here a little bit, incrementally improve. There's a step of improvement that's really important. Not just that very brute understanding of, okay, I get a manual task. I now, do that with a machine. That's a part of it, but that's not what the essence of an automation journey is all about.
No, and you need to challenge whether this task that you're trying to automate is either even worth automating, or is that a task that can be completely circumvented if you take a step back, look at the step before, the step after, well, rather the network of what's happening, right, in the process and the variance, and see what can be eliminated. Because in the end, I always say to my developers and also to myself many times, the best line of code is the line that doesn't exist, or doesn't need to exist. The best process step is the process step that doesn't need to exist. Now, obviously, you will have process steps that need to exist, and quite a lot of them, but get rid of as much boilerplate as possible, right? Because that will give you just less pieces that can break in the end.
Yeah, fascinating. Really like that. I mean, I knew, I had a hunch, talking about this journey that you guys been on there would kind of reveal some insights for folks here on the podcast, because I do think that too many people think of automation as this kind of binary, just replacing manual steps with a machine. I don't know if you know the category of RPA, robotic process automation,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, I think it's basically, okay, well, here's someone is clicking here and there, so let's have a machine do it. But I think that is maybe the most rudimentary form. I mean, I think there's so much more you can do in terms of automate. I think GenAI is teaching us to kind of rethink things. But then all these little things and improvements, how can you use data and so on? I think all of that needs to be put into consideration. You went into some really interesting things like the modularization, how you componentize it and so on. Anything that we haven't talked about, or anything, if you would give this audience, we have IT executives here on the call, they want to automate, they're thinking about automating their business processes and kind of going through a similar journey like what you did with your company. Any advice you would leave them with?
Yeah, I think a new automation mindset, like you describe it, starts with a culture that you need to set. And as a leader in IT or wherever place else, even as a parent, you have to be a role model somehow, right? Personally, and maybe that's really advice that doesn't apply to everybody, but my career started as being a developer basically, and then moving up the ladder. So what I would recommend leaders to do is get their hands dirty once in a while. Get down in the processes, get into operational work. And if you don't have the skills to do so, because maybe you are head of development, but last time you touched code was like 25 years ago, sit with your guys, experience the refinements, experience how they work, get a feel for how the work's being done. Not only of your devs, of course, but even more so of your stakeholders, of the people whose processes you want to automate. That's, of course, something they can't do on a daily basis, but once in a while, it's really good to regain this understanding, because it's easy to lose sight of the sometimes very simple problems. And then we in management make like very impactful decisions without an intuitive understanding of what's happening basically on the ground. So that would be my advice for how you personally should treat that. From what culture you should foster, I say build a culture where failing is being embraced. Not dumb failing, but being able to fail and learn from it is being embraced. So nobody has fear of basically failing. Another item which I think you should be tackling is when you're trying to automate something, typically there's a person whose job is somehow at risk. And maybe if there's a larger workforce, there are jobs at risk. But make those guys your friends. Make them part of the automation. Democratize the way of how they can basically collaborate in the process, how they can build automations, and you will see that you will have much better outcomes. And you will keep the people that are good, that have the expertise, and they build you the next level of processes that you actually were looking for. No, you weren't even looking for them. You were looking for automating them basically away, but you get the next level of processes, and the people with the knowledge still stay. That's a great thing. That would be, I think, the basic advice from a strategy, cultural perspective that I would give senior leadership here.
That's perfect. Hey, Dominik, thank you so much for your time. As I said, I had a feeling this would be great. I think it even exceeded my expectations. I think there's a lot to learn. And I think you made a lot of people who will listen to this podcast probably think what they're going to do, or maybe how they should do it differently and better in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Markus, for really giving me the opportunity to, speak, share my experience here, and share what I tripped over. It was really, really great fun. And just if like anybody would like to explore what we as a company basically do, hit our website at snpgroup.com. look at Keanu, the platform for business agility maybe, and deep dive into what data transformation can really make, basically in terms of business transformation and business agility.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominik.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.